Welcome. My name is Catherine Zipf. I'm the director of the Bristol Historical and Preservation Society, and I want to thank everybody for coming today. Also, while we're doing the thank yous, a very, very outsized thank you to Linden Place for allowing us the use of their ballroom carriage house. We are very grateful. Thank you, Linden Place. And thank you also to Alex Watros and his team, who will be filming. Lynn Smith, who is here on behalf of Linden Place, and my stalwart Chelsea, who is our program coordinator, who's been running around managing multiple entrances. And thank you all to you for coming. The purpose of our meeting today is a roundtable discussion about the origins of Bristol's Historic District, Commission and District, and some insights into why we have it, why it's important, and other things that we suspect that you'll ask us when we get to the audience Q&A. So how this will work, I'm going to introduce each of our four panelists today. This is a very esteemed and illustrious panel, so I am only here to ask the questions. They know a lot more than I do. And then, so we're going to ask them a few questions. We're going to banter some ideas around. I promise they will not have trouble talking about this topic. And then we're going to open up open to the floor for your questions, which I'm sure you'll have. So, without further ado, on the end is Dr. Kevin Jordan. Kevin Jordan, do you want to wave? Well, I don't know if we're going to go that far. Kevin Jordan was the first director of the Historic Preservation Program at Roger Williams University, which began in 1976. He held this position until his retirement. He has also been a past president and board member of Coggeshall Farm Museum and the Bristol Historical and Preservation Society, and he was the treasurer of the Bristol State House Foundation. He was also the first director of the Friends of Linden Place. In 1986, he was appointed by the town as chair of the Historic District Study Committee, which wrote the proposed ordinance that was accepted by the town of Bristol. He then served as the first chair of the commission. Next in line is Eric Hertfelder. Eric Hertfelder is a Bristol resident and former member of the Historic District Commission, who has served as executive director of the Rhode Island Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission, Leiswold Mansion Gardens and Arboretum, and Fort Adams Historic Site in Newport. Now retired, but we are grateful he is here with us today. He volunteers for various historical organizations and museums. David Andreozzi is a past Historic District Commission chairperson and founder of Andreozzi Architecture. He specializes in historically based residential architecture, expressive of its sense of place, attentive to its detail and proportion, and timeless in its beauty. And that's pretty awesome. Commissions exist from Commonwealth Avenue to the shores of New England to the Bahamian Islands. He is currently on boards of both the Lutyens Trust America and the New England Institute of Classical Architecture and Art. David is currently spearheading a new movement, Architectural Delight, hoping to educate the public on the importance of culturally responsible design with connectivity to people, history, and place, irrespective of style. Before this, David was AIA's national chair of CRAN. You may need to tell us what CRAN is. The AIA's Custom Residential Architects Network. See if I just simply read the rest of it, right? Andrew Tights, lastly, is a partner in the firm of Ursulo Tights and Rich, Ltd., and an AICP certified professional planner. Andy has been recognized as one of the best lawyers in America in land use and zoning law. Andy has drafted state enabling legislation on zoning and land development and dozens of municipal land use ordinances. He represents the Historic District Commissions of East Greenwich, South Kingstown, and Bristol, where his representation dates back to 1987. He also represents private clients before other municipal historic district commissions and is a frequent speaker on historic preservation law. So it is a highly qualified and esteemed panel. I'm really excited. And I think we're going to have a really good time. So the first question for you all was, can you tell us about the beginnings of Bristol's HDC? And Kevin, would you like to start?
Oh, I may as well. Bristol first tried, I hope, by the way, when you have a chance, you come up and look at this plan, but in 1959, there was a plan to demolish State Street and most of Hope Street and put in a recessed shopping mall. And that was the first record I found of a town planner thinking they should do something to protect their historic area. The plan went nowhere, and the town planner went nowhere with it. In 74, there was again an effort, right after around the survey that was in this book, done by Lombard, Pozzi, and Bonnie Warren, and that also didn't get anywhere. Again, it was tried in 1984, and some of you knew Helen Tesla. And Helen and the Historic Society and I, we worked very hard and just didn't quite have council support. The next year, we got some tremendous favorable publicity on historic Bristol buildings. And then we went back in 86 and got approval to start a study commission to put in a historic district. In 1987, the ordinance was adopted for the first time. So that's when the historic district dates from. I'm going to mention some parallel which turned out being very helpful relating to where you're sitting. In 1986, this property was for sale. A good offer, quote unquote, good offer was made by a local developer to put condominiums in here, 18 units in the back, I think 3 or 4 in the front. Before that, some merchants had talked about making this a parking lot because it had not been lived in. And so the Friends of Linden Place started forming in 1986 to try and do something for save this. And the two kind of melded together when people realized that an historic district was one salvation for this place. So the two kind of, without being intentionally done, though Mary Millard was sitting over there and I were the first employees of the Linden Place, but both involved with both the district and that. It kind of worked out in a nice marriage. So that's why I think the district was adopted, and in that same year of I think I wrote down the date, so I won't be wrong with it. In 1988, the state adopted a bond issue for $2 million to help buy Linden Place. And again, it was the momentum of Bristol becoming aware of itself, taking steps to protect itself, starting the commission, saving Linden Place, and the excitement that this seemed to generate at the time. So that's how you end up getting Linden Place. The whole state voted for it. And we had people from different colleges passing out bond flyers all over the state, but it won very handily. So that's kind of got us going at that point. And our first meeting, I think, was in '87 when we had our first applications to the historic district. So that's kind of the beginning.
I was wondering, does anybody want to add? Don't have to. Okay. So our next question was, can you tell us a little bit about the laws that support the Historic District Commission?
Well, I guess that comes
That's
to
you.
me. The laws in Rhode Island, we have what are called enabling acts. Cities and towns have charters which allow them to do specific things. They only exist what they can do what the state tells them to do. And then there are enabling laws that the General Assembly passes and says, oh, okay, you can have it. So actually, a lot of zoning ordinances in the early years were created. The state would have a specific law that says, okay, the town of Bristol may enact a zoning ordinance, or the town of Bristol may enact a historic district commission. By the time this was enacted in Bristol, there was a general enabling act that says any city and town that wants to can create one. And the requirements, essentially, the key first step is having a study. There has to be some documentation that what you are protecting is worth protecting. That doesn't mean that every single building in a district needs to be protected. In fact, just the opposite. The idea is you want to have, if you have a district that you're protecting, you want to make sure that you have regulation over everything in it and not ignore little bits of it. So in addition to which, Rhode Island allows, people talk about, oh, spot zoning is not allowed. But in fact, in the historic district zoning element, it is allowed. And so you can have particular properties that are not in the district, but are still their own historic district. In Bristol, those include places like the Veterans Home, Mount Hope Farm, things like that, that are specifically listed even though they're
Blythe.
way outside the district.
Blythewall, too.
Blythewall, yes. So, that's the overview there. As far as how it's created, you have to have the study, and then it's almost like a regular zoning ordinance. It goes before the planning board, it's recommended to the town council, its notice is sent to everybody who lives in the district and within 200 feet of it. And then at the end of that point, there's 3 weeks of notice in the newspaper and a public hearing. And if the town council chooses to adopt it, it becomes part of the zoning law. Interestingly, like all zoning, it doesn't cover pre-existing non-conforming uses. We often have people say, well, I want to have vinyl windows in my house, and the guy next door to me has vinyl windows. Why can't I do it? And usually that's because that house had vinyl windows before Kevin got to work and they created the district, or before the district was expanded to include that area. So the people who have these non-conforming elements can continue to maintain those non-conforming elements, although we certainly urge people to, we encourage people to improve the materials if they can, but they have the right to replace them with what's there.
So I have something I want you to follow up on, is the difference, explaining the difference between a design board or design review board and a historic district commission, and how you're not just making arbitrary decisions on so-called beauty or fashion, but it's tied to something called the Secretary of Interior Standards.
Yes, well, that's beyond the establishment, but yes, in the implementation of it. And I guess, Eric, you brought copies of some of the book. I didn't even know you could get it in paper form these days. I thought it's only online, but as I said, part one of establishing the district is having a study that indicates what are the values of these properties. And it doesn't just say, oh, we're drawing the line here, it's why. And it looks at each property and usually gives it some kind of ranking and talks about why it's important. Some are important for their architectural features, some are important for who lived there or who slept there. George Washington slept there. Things like that. What cannonballs happen to be stuck in their walls. There are various elements that make them historically valuable, and that's documented to begin with. So upon reviewing applications, the commission is supposed to consider those elements and also these standards. The commission can develop their own standards or simply rely on the National Park Service, their standards as well. But that they're not arbitrary. It's not just, I think that looks better or so forth. And I think we'll talk about that later when we talk about things like solar panels or whatnot.
Yeah.
There are different views on the aesthetics, and sometimes they conflict with the historic preservation aspect. But that's not what it's supposed to be. It's not. The other thing too, a big mistake, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, is, but people want to put an addition on their house. And they design it to look exactly like the original house. And that's wrong. That's what we call conjecture. That's Disneyland. And the guidelines say that you should be able to differentiate the new addition from what was there before, so that someone can walk by and say, oh yeah, that's a new addition. Whether you use different window, different material. Good example downtown here in Bristol is the bank, what used to be the Fleet Bank. And when the new owners came in, they wanted to use more of basically their upstairs was unused, and they wanted to use more of that upstairs. So they wanted to put in an elevator tower. So if you look at the building from the street, from the right rear, there's a brick elevator tower. And the original plan had brick exactly matching the brick that the building was made with. And it had a colonial window, a fake colonial window to match the fake colonial windows in the building. And the Historic District Commission said, no, that shouldn't be. Just use a different brick, use a newer brick. Let people see where the old building was, where the new addition is. So those are some of the elements of the guidelines.
That's an interesting point. I spent my life opposing that, kind of, and philosophically. And it's really started, I was hosting a lecture, moderating a lecture with Bobby McAlpine, who's an incredibly nationally well-known architect 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And this whole discussion came up of whether things should match or not. And having been on the Historic District Commission, I had the microphone, I was walking around, I asked 150 architects in the room. I said, if you have a choice of your favorite piece of architecture that you designed in your career being added on to 100 years after your death, would you want it to look, the additions to look different, to celebrate you, or would you like it to relate to your original partee? And every single hand wanted it not to be different. They wanted it to relate to the original partee and just respect what was there. So I've spent my life sort of going, okay, there are extreme examples where you have a traditional museum and a modern piece of sculpture stuck on it that is offensive. But we were at a lecture with a friend of mine, a Notre Dame professor, just this year, and he was actually explaining, and he's a Notre Dame architecture professor, explaining why it actually does make sense. And by the end of that hour, I walked out going, okay, I need to be a little bit more open-minded, that you need to be, as he's talking about Roman history through centuries and how pieces should relate to each other, but you should be able to tell the difference. But they should relate. Anyway, I digress.
Well, but I would argue, okay, if we ask those same, see, we're going to get off already, right?
But this is good.
But if we ask those same 150 architects, if they are to do the addition onto these celebrated, right? I feel for the people who do things like add the addition onto the Guggenheim. Oh my God, the pressure. What if they're the ones doing the addition? Then don't they want to make their mark?
Well, that's an architecture part.
That is an architecture question.
So if it's about ego, and that starts with the person who's going to choose the architect, the patron or the group of patrons that choose the architect to build their museum. If they're bringing in Renzo Piano to design a museum to the Gardner Museum, then they're expecting it to be a certain thing. So that starts by who you hire.
Right.
So, there's certain sorts of architects that for, I don't know, call it ego, or call it narcissism, or call it just, that's a brand that they create. They are trying to be different. And there's just as many architects that are trying to relate to, and I'm not talking about Disney, copy, reproduced, fake historic details, but have something look like it has grown and blended in over history, like the Capitol.
That was a good answer. Does anybody want to add to the point before we move on?
I would just put on our zoning, and Bristol is unique. The town put all its property under the zoning. Most cities and towns had not done that. And all the public property. So sidewalks, curbs. So when you see them take out a sidewalk, they got to put back what's there. Across the street from the bagel place, they had to put the bluestone back. The bluestone was there. There's a granite curb. They can't put in a cheap curb. They got to put granite back. So the town was the first to actually do that in its part in its ordinance. So that part's been very successful for years in saving sidewalks, especially in High Street where they wanted to redo them with the poor tar sidewalks instead of concrete.
Yes, I'll verify that too. When DOT came in many years ago with the sidewalks, that was their plan. No matter what was there currently, they were going to just put asphalt down after they were done with it. And we said, no, you can't do that. And they said, oh, why? So does the town subject itself to its HTC? And we said, yes, it's right here. And they said, oh, okay. And as Kevin said, they didn't improve things. If it was asphalt, they put back asphalt. But if it was bluestone, they fixed the bluestone and so forth. And they're doing it again now. There's going to be an expansion of sidewalks again downtown and repair. And this time, there was no question about it. They came to the Historic District Commission right away in the beginning. Here are our plans. This is what we're thinking of doing. So it has a long-term effect.
Yeah, and it's just to add that project really is going through the Section 106 process, because I was notified as an interested party as the Historical Society to review that. And so that's an aside from the HDC. These are other historic preservation legislation that, that does consultation as part of Section 106. These are all sorts of legislation that is under serious attack at the federal level, but they have a significant impact, and I got the opportunity to weigh in on that whole sidewalk project. So, I mean, and this is not easy for me because it is pages and pages and pages of plans of sidewalks running pretty much from the top of Warren all the way down to the seawall. But you better believe I looked at every last piece of it, and you know, I want my opportunity to say something. That's what this legislation is about. Anybody can go to the HDC meeting. I'll see you there. Kevin, do you want to hold up that book for just a quick second to say?
The survey.
Yeah, that's the survey. That's what Andy was talking about earlier about how you don't just, you know, we don't just magically conjure up a historic district. The people are sent out in the field to look and see what's there, and that's.
Buildings were rated by architects and historic significance, and any buildings that were outside of the proposed district that were A1 for either architecture or history, we became the outlying properties, like Lake Road and so on. It's something we need to maybe extend, but at that point, that's what it's done. Before we go too far, I have to do it. I got to read a quote from John Ruskin.
Oh.
And I'm sorry, I insist on it. It goes for new and additions. When we build, let us think that we build forever. Let it not be for present delight, nor for present use alone. Let it be such work as our descendants will thank us for it. And I say to people that do an addition, do something that the next people are going to be proud of, not that just serves your use or most convenient to stick it in this way. And, you know, I do a lot of walks through town. There's a lot of buildings in town where you can see that, where people have added on at different time periods and different frameworks that was done well. It added to the pleasure of the house, to the light of the house. And then you can see crap that people just put on. So I think there's a philosophical issue that I always try and stretch, which is, you know, we have preservation not because we're the most important person in 225, but 245, 1965, the buildings have lived. And our goal is to let them continue living without becoming museums, because not everything's a museum. You know, Linden Place is a museum, and it should be probably preserved pretty much intact, but other houses have to be lived in. You can do it well, you can do it that adds, or you can do a gut rehab and make it look like Mickey Mouse. And the whole idea here is we should be as proud of what we're going to do today as we are in saving something that was there today, so that the next generation of architects will look and say, God, I'm glad I did it that way. Rather than just do what the best or what was the fantasy and so on. We get stuck sometimes preserving fantasies. The bank that was referred to already, that was on the corner of State Street and Hope Street, you know. Kind of mishmash put in, I believe in the 60s and so on, but now it's historic. It's the last sturdiest building by that architect, who did some other buildings at the old bus station in Providence and so on. So it's taken on a kind of life, but yet we could add to it. And I think Andy, at our discussion of this, mentioned that they wanted to put their ramp to get to the takeout there, the ATM, right on Hope Street. And the HCC was got them to be able to turn it around the corner, so at least kind of preserve that part. So that even those kind of buildings, you can do things with. But I think philosophically it's something to think about, that, you know, we tend to think, what do I want, versus what does the building want and the community want. But that's my Ruskin quote. I have another one, but I won't do both.
I will jump on Ruskin. So going back hundreds and hundreds of years before, you use the word delight, which is an important word. At birth of Christ, 2,000 years ago, Vitruvius, who defined what architecture was, said it was commodity, firmness, and delight. But delight was one word. And a lot of people think that delight means art. Art, say, you must have art in it. The reality of that word, it was venustus. It was a Latin word called venustus. And venustus is an inner connection to an object or a person that comes from the DNA. So when you look at a piece of art and you say, you know what I love, it's a pretty piece of art, but I like that one. Or that's a pretty girl or boy, but I'm going to marry that one, because you're not looking at the beauty, you're looking at something deeper. And it relates because it's relating to culture and history. That's what the Venustus is. And so if you need to have a relation to vernacular, people, history, somehow in the design, and I'm not talking about the style, you can do it with many different styles, but if it's not in that design, then people aren't going to love it. And if they're not going to love it, then it's not going to be green and it's not going to be saved. So you can make it about you, and you can build a piece of sculpture, and you can win an award, and it gets ripped down in 50 years, or you can think about, to the point of delight, what does really belongs in this place? I'm sorry, we sidetracked. But.
No, that's okay. It was the point of the round table, right?
Yeah.
That was the point. I think we had just a handful of things that we had talked about before this that we had talked about that we wanted to talk about. So I just wanted to, the floor I think goes to Andy on this. What the heck was the Penn Central case? And can you tell us about formula businesses? Okay. And then we'll get to the part I know you all want, which is the good, the bad, and the interesting.
But first we have the boring legal stuff. So
I'll be right back.
The Penn Central case is just, it's the leading case in the country. It's a United States Supreme Court case from 1978. And people hear it as the Penn Central case and think, oh, it's Penn Station. No, it's Grand Central Station. And a proposal to basically completely cover Grand Central Station with a huge skyscraper. The City of New York Landmarks Commission denied it. It went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said a couple of things. One, that landmark laws which embody a comprehensive plan to preserve structures of historic or aesthetic interest are not discriminatory. Basically, they are allowed. It's legal. Historic district zoning had been approved in the past by the Supreme Court, but it hadn't included individual structures, and this went further to say that as long as it's part of a comprehensive scheme, even if it's just one building, like as you were saying, Blythewald or something like that that's not connected, it still is a legitimate public purpose to do that. And then the other thing is basically saying that, these sort of laws were not takings under the Fifth Amendment. The government didn't have to compensate people. And again, it's part of a long history of legal cases that says the government regulates what you can do with your property and has for millennia. And certainly in English common law and in this country for centuries, there's always rules about what you can do with your property, and nuisance laws. You can't have a pig farm that your pigs are straying onto other people, and you can't fill land that floods your neighbor. And that having these laws that restrict property are not takings, and it's not something the government has to compensate you for. As long as you have a reasonable expectation of profit from what you do, you're not entitled to automatically the highest or most intense use of a property, including historic preservation. And in this case, it was the Penn Central Railroad had a perfectly good train terminal, which is what they had built it for. They had a very good train terminal that was making a profit to begin with. And in New York City, they also had transferable development rights of their air rights. So the skyscraper could be built in a different location and they could still realize money. And in fact, thus the Pan Am building was built. Which has probably become an iconic historic structure in its own right.
In of itself, right?
since then.
Yeah.
But so it's just to make clear that, it is, people say, oh, you can't tell me what to do with my property, until the person next door to them proposes something they don't like. And then they're here saying, oh, wait a minute, don't let them do it. So, and they tied into, it's got to be part of a comprehensive scheme. It can't be arbitrary and capricious or just based on aesthetics. And the second thing you asked about formula businesses is something, in Rhode Island, this is unique. It's not very common. There are a few around New England. Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard are the most notable examples. But the idea of regulating a formula business is kind of what we think of as like a national chain or a franchise. Our definition in Bristol is if it's 5 or more locations and they operate with a common design scheme of what it's supposed to look like, signs and so forth. And that can range from McDonald's to a bank chain, so forth. So in Bristol, we put in an ordinance in the historic district. If you're a formula business, you have to be approved by the Historic District Commission. And the one difference between, generally the Historic District Commission only regulates what's on the outside of the building. If you want to gut the whole inside of the building and take out all the beautiful mantles, as long as you're not using government funds to do it, you can do it. But the formula business one went so far as to regulate what you're doing inside the building that can be seen from outside the building. So if you've got a storefront with big plate glass windows, what you're doing inside that area is also regulated. And also you have to go to the zoning board for a special use permit. So there's a review, and this was done for two reasons. First of all, nobody legally can challenge the ordinance on its face. They would have to go to the zoning board, apply for the special use permit, and be denied before they would have any chance to challenge the ordinance. And also, because the role is not to prohibit these places in town, it's simply to regulate it so that, you know, when you drive down Thames Street in Newport, all the signs for all the stores you see are pretty much what you see throughout any mall in America. They're all national chains, so forth like that. The idea is to try to create an appearance that there's something unique about Bristol when you walk down the street or drive through it. And we have had some applications, and I think particularly some of the real estate companies. And they haven't been denied. It's just, no, you can't use all your particular logo scheme. You could use a small logo in the door like everybody else has a small sign there, but no one's been denied, but it's just regulated. So formula businesses, and again, it's only in the historic district. You can build whatever ugly signs you want out on Metacom Avenue.
And guess what? Major companies get over it. Ralph Lauren in Nantucket,
Yeah.
Hermes, Gucci, they end up in unique villages with unbelievable constraints, and they're not in their typical brand store. And guess what? The people still go.
Right. I mean, I collect pictures when I travel. There's a CVS on the Riverwalk in San Antonio that's entire sign is about 6 inches by 2 feet hanging, you know, from a little thing with chain, just like the other signs. There's another one in Hyannis in a former theater and things like that, and their signage is small. So they will do it.
Yeah, and I'll go one better on you before I turn the floor over to Eric, to say that we were driving through Williamsburg, and there was a shopping center that had no signage whatsoever. How do you find what's in the shopping center? You're using your phone. You don't need signs. Your phone tells you where things are. Eric, it's true. I was stunned. I almost like...
That's like the opposite of Beaux-Arts.
It was one of those like moments of like, oh my God, stop the car. But Eric, you had your hand up. You wanted to say something.
Well, before we move to questions, I wanted to address one of the things in here that you thought we would address, and that is what is unique about the Bristol Historic District Commission. I don't like the word unique because there is nothing in the world which is unique. Someone will always find something or whatever. But I have to tell you that thanks to my time at working at a national historic preservation organization, which held 4 meetings a year around the country, I have seen a lot of historic districts in almost every state in the Union. And Bristol really has one of the best, and for several reasons. One is it's large. You can really go into it and you're in another environment for quite some time, you know, from Thames Street to Hope to High and up to Wood. It's all small scale, you know, pretty intact architecture. And people respond to that. And the amount of detail on Bristol buildings in terms of the Victorian turnings and moldings and all that stuff, and colonial doorways, is everywhere. And that is I can tell you, that is very, very rare to have it in that quantity and to be able to walk around and go block after block and change streets and still be in it is a real treat. And, people do respond to that. That's one reason why it's an incredibly popular place for people who want to live here. And I'm thinking of the house on High Street, Usher House, is it? Is that it?
Maybe, which one?
Well, the one that we all thought was going to be torn down.
The Vulture House?
The Vulture House.
The Vulture House.
Yeah.
The House of Usher, yeah, right. Well, the one that the birds had colonized. But someone bought it, and they hired, one of the best preservation contractors in the state, Tavares, to completely redo the house under historic district guidelines and restore the moldings and whatever, and it's going to be brought back. So that gives you an idea of the power of the historic district, that it is very desirable and people want to live here, and it's the reason we get attractions, whether you like them or not, like Porch Fest or things like that, because people from all over the state want to be here.
I talked for too long to be quiet. Formula business, remember the old Dunkin' Donuts in the corner? Yes. That was both cause and effect of the ordinance, they're coming in and so on, and it was done relatively sympathetically. And that's what you mean by you can put something in there. They couldn't get their drive-through, but I just want to mention, in terms of Gary, what just being mentioned, Eric, the other thing Bristol has, which shows why, we inherited a hell of a nice town plan from 1680. The width of our streets, the size of our lots, all of that's been pretty much respected, little exceptions like Wadwell Street, but pretty much the town has kind of kept that original plan. And that's a key part of the history of the town too. The width of the streets, what takes place along the streets. I mean, we're the only one like that in Rhode Island, actually. We have a common, we have all these things. But that also is something that's been very important to preserve, keeping that. When it gets screwed around with, and we have the major one they screwed around on State Street where they took out and put the angular parking. Some of you might have been here when they had the tree massacre back. Anyone remember that? Going down State from Hope down, I real massacre her, but there were all trees along the edge of the sidewalk. And I took out the whole row of trees and put angular parking in to increase parking. That could be done a lot more in town, and that really could help to destroy the context. So the original quality of the town is something that's both survived and is part of what we have to continue surviving, because it makes the walkable, livable place.
Yeah, landscaping.
And it's nice to see a sidewalk and some grass and some trees, and then the street. And it'd be nice to have wider parking on Hope Street. Everyone says, why don't we? Because that's a whole quality of life that gets involved with that, So you have to slow down when someone gets out of their car. I'll take the mirror off, one or the other. But that's not at the end of the world, and not, I think, to preserve the fact of the life of the town. And that's it.
And that's actually just the future of urban design. Like, that's what people right now around the world are looking at and it really started with Prince Charles and supporting a bunch of developments in England, Palmbury, and there's a development in America as well. But it's gone over the last 3 or 4 decades of trying to figure out, how do we make cities walkable again? How do we make them so that they are mixed use and they live all times of the day? And that's the future. And they're looking at cities like ours, towns like ours, and saying, how can we create that? We were lucky.
Okay.
All right, let's get to the heart of it, right? What was everybody's best moment while serving on the HDC? Come on, best.
I think getting it started, and for me, at the beginning, gradually getting people to support it. When we started my first couple, we had no staff, so if there was a phone call, I got it. And probably 2/3 of phone calls I got would be someone calling, telling me a neighbor was doing something that didn't look right. So we could call it squealing, but we could also call it people becoming aware that there was something good to be done. And that the gradual development of that, we had pretty much the whiners, without getting any whiners, were coming into the town and wanting to do what they wanted to do. The homegrown people, if you want to call them, I can only be a Bristolite. I've only been here since the 70s. You're a Bristolian if you were born here. But both the Lights and the Oleans really started to appreciate what Bristol had. And that just came so quickly in the 80s. And I think that's the major part. That yes, there would be fights later on about this, that, and the other one. Yes, you know, you name the thing. But the general, gradual, and consensus that this was good. You know, later on, not long after that, there'll be a vote to repeal the ordinance in Bristol that loses. And I had more people say that every other town, if the whole town voted on it, would have lost. In Bristol, even those who didn't live here voted for it, enough that it survived. And that was, in one way you can say it was close, another way it was a great achievement. It had not been done anywhere else in the state or actually in the region that I'm aware of. So that kind of thing would be more than a particular building. I mean, obviously saving Linden Place was crucial, but that took on a life well beyond the HDC. And that's fine.
Eric, how about you? Do you have a best moment?
I think my best moments were when a property owner wanted to do something major to the house, an addition, adding a garage, and so forth, and and I was assigned to be the monitor, and was able to work with the owner to convince them of all sorts of things, like the wisdom of hiring. You know, if they didn't want to go the full Monty and hire an architect, sorry, David, you know, at least hire a contractor who could do drawings, so that the commission could actually see whatever. And that happened in a couple of occasions, and we worked it out, and, you know, a major, well, you know, pretty substantial addition was put on the house that people drive by now and they don't even notice it because it is blended in, uses the same moldings and so forth. So whenever that happened, that made me happy.
Yeah. All right, David, your turn.
So I'm going to give you two. My second is that there was a handful of people, and this isn't the case with all, but we can talk about windows later, but there was a handful of times that people came to us with significantly historic windows and with a contractor that wanted to basically replace them for all the reasons that they see on TV. And we basically, in a handful of situations, encourage them to get somebody to get a cost to restore the windows and put a high quality storm window on it, and challenge them that it would cost less money. And in every case they said less money. And to see that actually happen multiple times was rewarding. But my first by far, which is an interesting one, is not a high profile thing. It's the Mount Hope Liquors. So Mount Hope Liquors was basically it was a father and son, and I think I heard last night that the son may have passed away. But the father and son came to us one night, and they have this shoebox. They said, we have a shoebox of a building. And they said, we want to do something nice for the building. So we've done some drawings, and we want to put something pretty on it. And they showed us the drawings, well, we had seen them, but of like an overhang like a McDonald's, like a mansard angled 1970s overhang that went around. And so we're all kind of speechless because you don't know really how to respond. And there was silence. And he made a comment. He goes, I really want to do something beautiful for the town. That's why I'm showing you this. And I said, I hear you. And I said, I think this might be a little dated. He said, really? I said, well, it's pretty, but I said, it's kind of like reminiscent of the 70s and 80s. I said, what about maybe just like putting simplified moldings on? He goes, what do you mean? And I said, why don't you come to my office tomorrow morning and and I'll just do some quick sketches and show you what I mean. And they showed up at my office in Barrington the next morning. I pulled out a Brasco stock catalog book. I did some quick sketches. And it was like I gave somebody like $1 million, but they were doing it for the town. And they came back to us. And if you go there now, it's a very simplified parapet that goes around. It's not going to win any architecture awards, but it was them doing something for the town. And so that to me was a rewarding experience.
Top that, Andy.
I can't. And in fact, I mean, your question is, best moments sitting on the HDC, and obviously I'm not a member, I don't have a vote. And, I try not to let my own views on things interfere. I try to keep advice to the legal stuff. So in a way, some of the best moments that I've had, I think, are behind the scenes and don't even deal necessarily with the HDC meetings, but some of the changes to the zoning. One we mentioned was the formula business. Another one, I think, which had a major beneficial effect on the historic district, doesn't have anything to do with historic preservation directly either, but is back in the early 90s when we were redoing the whole zoning ordinance, we eliminated the parking requirement for businesses downtown. Other than you had a hotel or residences, you still had to provide parking, but you could have a bookstore, you could have a restaurant, you could have a clothing store without having to provide parking. And that took a lot of pressure, I think, off of demolition, where people would have had to demolish things. I mean, we see it continually in Newport. They use it to kind of restrict and prevent any expansion, but they've got a lot more demand for their commercial space. I think we'd either have people demolishing things for parking lots or empty storefronts. And we've had our shares of empty storefronts over the years, but for the most part, it's pretty well stayed occupied. And I think that's something that helps the historic district a great deal, not to need that parking. And the studies, again, it's just like the historic district. The studies were done to show that it wasn't there. There was an aerial photos flying of a Saturday in the summer in Bristol. And you look down and you can see, if you walk one block one way or one block the other, there's plenty of parking spaces. Maybe not right in front of the store on Hope Street, but there were plenty of parking spaces, so it allowed us to prove you don't need it. You don't need this requirement. And now that has become a major component of new urbanism, and Providence picked it up and so forth. But I think that's probably one of the most important ones and gives me the most pleasure.
Yeah, when I first moved here and we were reading the Phoenix, which I hope all of you read the Phoenix because I delight in reading the Phoenix every week, all of the call-ins were about, there's no parking in Bristol. And I'm driving down Hope Street, looking at all the parking spaces, thinking, what on earth are you talking about? And of course, what they're talking about is those 3 spots in front of the post office. Right? Those spots are full, right? But there's no parking in Bristol. So, and I have to say that even last weekend, my husband and I got a rare night out and went down to Newport. And even then, you know what? We didn't get to park on Thames Street, that's for sure. But it's not that far. It's really not. Walk an extra block, and could be. It's sort of an entitle. I think it's a fascinating sense of entitlement, sort of an entitlement to public space, right? I must be able to park right next to whatever I'm doing, and no, you don't.
I must demand that you tell the post office story right now.
Okay.
Because it's crucial. The zoning. It's a wonderful story.
Post office is an old mansion. I was going to bring up the 2 violations of our sense of integrity out of the post office and the library. Because you get down Thames Street, they punched holes in the whole streetscape. Post office, they get in, library has parking. And I've been to lots of main streets too, and that's a lot of what you get on the main streets is facadism, storefronts look front, and in the back they create these massive parking lots. And then you just kind of a facade, as I call it. Just you look at nice buildings on the main street and the rest parking. We've avoided that. We have a whole street here. But the post office did want to move out to where Ace Hardware is. At one point there was a proposal, and they can't.
Right. The only zone in which a post office is allowed in Bristol is the downtown zone. And even though, yes, we have the parking lots there on Thames Street, and I mean, it's a balance and trade, and so there's a sacrifice there. But the idea of having the post office and the library here just brings so many people. The idea is to keep the district a place people want to live. And I mentioned the other one, the Pastime Theater is a case I think I look at as an individual building being sacrificed for the good of the district, because it allowed that expansion of Andrews School, which kept Colt Andrews, it kept the elementary school right in the heart of the town, which there wouldn't be any ones left. All the old ones on the common became obsolete, closed, so there wouldn't be any elementary school downtown. But when I drive by at 3 o'clock, and yes, I complain and grumble about the traffic, but it's a good thing to see the people who are driving and all the people who've walked down there, standing out on the sidewalk waiting for their kids to come out, because that meant that they wanted to live here. Maybe they wanted to live here in part because it was a historic district. Maybe they didn't know it was a historic district. Maybe they lived here despite it being a historic district. But they live downtown and care about downtown because of these things that they can walk to downtown.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite thing. I also do not sit on the Historic District Commission, rather categorically so, but I do attend as many meetings as I can. I'm always frightened to read the minutes of the meetings that I haven't attended. But my favorite thing about these meetings is the community conversation that we're having about our resources, right? That this will be something that will add to the community, this part of it will subtract from the community. I like that Bristol does this as a community. We think about our resources together, and we think about trade-offs like the pastime. I mean, I'm sad to see the pastime go too. On the other hand, if my kid were there, I'd want my kid to have a really nice library. And I will definitely say that I think the Rogers Free Library is the nicest library in the state. I go to all the libraries, I spend a lot of time in libraries, and we have the best. We really do. We have the nicest children's room, and I don't mean that just because the people in it are nice. It is a great space. It is a wonderful building, and we're so lucky to have that here in Bristol. And yeah, we had to sacrifice a furniture store, but look what we get. So, I think it's the conversations that come about because we have the Historic District Commission that make our community so great. The other two things that I was going to ask was most interesting moment. Maybe we want to skip ahead to lessons learned and then open it up to the audience. What do you think?
Open it up.
Open it up. We don't want to talk about lessons learned. Well,
my it's a wrap up.
Sure. I mean, my lesson learned is you have to go to the meetings, without a doubt. All right. So, are there questions from the audience? Up in the front here,
we're gonna do microphone.
And we need Alex, come around with the microphone.
Hit a mic so we all can, maybe.
All right. Oh,
So just be mindful of whoever wants to speak. Hold on.
okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Sounds good.
Hi. How do you navigate kind of modern constraints of things like ADA? You touched on solar panels within the historic district. I mean, you were talking about the beauty of the streetscape and being able to keep the trees and the grass strip. But I know in many municipalities that's kind of in conflict with getting the wider widths for ADA and things like that. So just wanted to kind of touch base on how you navigate some of those things.
So are you referring to renovating existing spaces or new architecture and urban spaces? Or
I'm talking about both. I'm talking about, obviously with solar panels within the historic district, that I think is becoming more prevalent and putting them in spaces, maybe where they can't be viewed from the street and sight lines and things like that. But also just modern, technology in general, like ADA. Obviously, it's been a law for 25 years. I live in Newport, even though I've represented Bristol. I built out the Colt School and the Andrews School and the library as the owner's rep. So I've dealt with this town a lot. And I love, a lot of the stuff that you guys do here. But in Newport, we've lost a lot of that. They've cut down the trees to widen the sidewalks and things like that. And somehow you guys have seemingly been able to preserve that a little bit better than we have. And I'm just wondering how.
Well, I think and I'm talking because David handed me the microphone.
The solar panels.
Solar panels.
Okay, so I'll take the solar panel question.
And I'll
'cause,
take the rest.
I think it's important, like I said, it's important to make people want to live in historic houses and keep them up. And so that's why I think things like the library and the schools and the post office are important. But I also think it's important also to help wherever we can with making the houses livable. Now, we have windows, which are a whole separate issue, but one of the big arguments why people want to replace windows is energy efficiency. So if we can provide other efforts to improve energy efficiency with these old homes, I think that helps again to make people want to live there. And to me, again, it's so the solar panels, if you can do it without cutting down the trees, solar panels on roofs are a very good idea. I think the key thing is reversibility. When you do something, whatever it is it reversible? That's the big thing about the windows. Because when those windows are all removed, even when we require as a condition that the old windows be kept, they never are, they get destroyed. They're gone for good. But all the other stuff that we're talking about adding, like the solar panels, unless your roof is slate or Spanish tile, or cedar shake, which is pretty rare, and I don't think we have any thatched roof houses in Rhode Island. So other than that, these things are totally reversible. They're not harming the historic fabric at all of the house. In fact, I think we see that. We've seen the solar panels that went on 30, 40 years ago using the water systems. Most of them have been removed. And the solar panels are getting thinner and thinner, and I understand, there are shingles. You can actually shingle a whole roof with the solar panels, and it just looks like a shingled roof. I don't think those are cost competitive currently, but at some point they will be. But in the meantime, if we can allow people to put solar panels, and the second part, and I would have added this with a lesson learned, is make it easy to comply. So, like in Bristol, if you want to put solar panels, and they're not going to be significantly visible from the street or public place, we make it as something that's a staff permit. You don't even have to wait a month and come to a meeting. If it's going to be right on the front, if that's the only roof face that works for you, because that faces south or trees or whatnot, then you have to come to the Historic District Commission for a review. But in general, it's the sort of thing that should be, I think, granted. People say aesthetics, it doesn't look historic. Well, neither do all these electric wires that we have, or the stop signs or things like that, but we have to make it a livable place, and it's reversible over time. So that's kind of my view of we should make these modern things available as much as we can, as long as it's reversible and, it doesn't destroy the historic fabric that's there.
Reversible really is the key, and that ties back to, we talked about the Secretary of Interior standards, or the datums that the board is supposed to use to judge all cases in case they go up to the courts and get appealed. It all has to relate to this rule, and the rules is, to oversimplify it, says that piece of wood, the actual piece of wood is what's important. The fact that it came from a chestnut tree that is extinct in New England and is there and has been there, and the glass was hand blown, and so you're trying to protect the actual architectural fabric, not even necessarily the design in many cases. And so the reversible issue is important, so that it's funny when people say, well, what about the color? Well, you can technically, right? You can paint anything you want because that's reversible. So reversibility is really the key to, you have more flexibility than you think. But when something is sculptural or handcrafted, then you have to pay a different sort of religious respect to it.
On reversibility, I tell people, when they buy a house and come into town, live there for a year before you do anything. I don't know how many people come in, want to remodel, and then they regret it. If you're buying an old house, live in it, find out what need to be changed. And if you make the changes, reversible is the crucial part. But get used to something before you just decide it's got to go. And that's the hardest part, when people just come in and they want to do everything. And I've had more people regret it than come back and say, I'm glad I did it that way. So, I'm not sure that's reversible, but it's close.
I don't know if we actually answered the question of modernity. So, because the question is, how do you make something modern? Right? And how do you keep things in modern? And it's an interesting question, but you see historic structures through, again, Europe and America. I'm talking about old structures. How do you make it ADA compliant? How do you make these things accessible? And that's a really, really difficult question. In some cases, you're forced to compromises.
Right. I mean, I'm an architect by background and former director of properties at I'm architect by background and former director of properties at the Preservation Society. I put like geothermal into the breakers and did stuff that was like non-conspicuous and stuff. But even getting ADA ramps and things like that are a hardship, you know. And I know there's equivalent accommodation where you can sit in some other place and watch a video or something like that. But, you know, it's never quite the same, you know.
So I mean, you're right, it's not the same. And I'd argue that none of the buildings in Bristol are the same as they were when they were originally built either. This is, I think, part of the community conversation that we have about this. And I would argue that the Preservation Society has fortunately or unfortunately, it has an extra level of responsibility as far as ADA compliance. These are public buildings that are open to the public, and things like safety are an issue, and how people are moving through space is an issue. Private buildings have, of course, a very different standard. So what you're really talking about is the overarching movement through the spaces of the streets. This is, again, where Bristol has an advantage. Our town plan fosters this. Our town plan is we have the space in which to do this. So one of the things I'm working on, for those who do not know, the Bristol Historical Society occupies the former Bristol County Jail. We are having a lot of conversations right now about accessibility, both internally in the building. So we now no longer have any exhibits upstairs because we couldn't count on people being able to get back down the stairs. They can get up just fine, they just can't get back down again. And we don't have space for an elevator. Or rather, we could do an outside elevator, but we're talking about carving through an 18-inch thick stone wall. We're not going to do that. And the only other way to deal with accessibility in our building, because our almost all of our doors are too narrow for a wheelchair, is a landscaping solution. That's the only way. So we're going to have to think about we're fortunate to have a yard nearby where we can think about these issues. I think technology is on our side for accessibility. Part of the conversations that we've been having about accessibility at the Historical Society has involved people who are out there advocating for accessibility in general, and they present solutions. So, for example, did you know you can get a temporary ramp that will go up over a flight of stairs, right? You can put that ramp out when somebody needs it. It literally folds up, stores in a closet when you don't. So I think there's modern technology is on our side. Reversibility makes it possible. And I think there's a lot of sort of hope for these things. I mean, I haven't really seen anybody on the Historic District Commission oppose technological intervention. I haven't really seen that. I think the question is, how are you going to do it, and how can you do that in a way that minimizes the impact on the building and the streetscape? But that's, and again, it's about the conversations.
I mean, I'm thinking, like St. Michael's Church, their ramp is, I think, a very good example of, where they put in a ramp, but it's very well designed so it fits in with the building. It's not in your face when you're looking at the building. Things like that.
You can talk about Citizens Bank?
Citizens Bank, which if the weather's good and we're there. But Citizens Bank, they hired some regional national architecture company come in and, look at their branches for 5 different states and make them all compliant. And so they came in, they looked at Bristol, and they just kind of threw this plan to basically rip out half the concrete that was there in their front entrance and have this big ramp onto the Hope Street sidewalk, which is a nice wide sidewalk. They were going to take half of it with this ramp around. And, that was it. That was what they came in with. And we were able to work with them and say, well, wait a minute. The other side, you got a hill.
Yeah.
You could work with the hill and the slope and have a much slower thing, and it's all glass. You take one panel of glass and replace it with a door and come in the other side too, and you get the ATM and the entrance to the building all in one. I mean, we probably saved them a couple $100,000 just in the cost of it, not to mention that, you know, it's accessible, but it's much less intrusive. Is it intrusive on the side street? Yeah, it's there. But those are the things I think, you know, you have to work to compromise and try to get the best solution with the least impact. And figure that perhaps, you know, who knows, when we have magnetic levitation wheelchairs in 40 or 50 years, maybe we'll be jackhammering out all those concrete ramps.
Yeah.
Your shoes.
I know Tony has a question over here. I just wanted to say this question of, you know, I'm going to take a little pride that, you know, Bristol's a lot nicer than Newport. Like, I couldn't leave Newport. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Having a historic ordinance that relates to the sidewalks and the streets, that caught me. I think that's
Absolutely amazing and fascinating. Yeah, I don't think we have that in Newport. I'd never heard of such a thing. And we had a lot of like nice, beautiful flagstone and bluestone, you know, huge slabs that are now gone. Yeah.
Yeah. So Tony had a question, and then again, we'll open the floor.
I will just say, though, I think Newport, I think the state DOT was forced to deal with that on the Bellevue Avenue sidewalks because of 106 and the fact that it was a national registered district. That's what forced them to do it there.
in front of Marble House, which I was the steward of.
What's that? Let's just get the mic. I apologize. I'm sorry.
Huge, like 20 foot by 10 foot by 8-inch deep bluestone slabs in front of the Marble House, which also have all of the electrical conduits and water under there, and which are deteriorating in the house and need repair. But to move those, you know, multi-ton slabs is very difficult and would have been our responsibility. And I never had the budget to do that, so I had to do all kinds of like, you know, workarounds. But that was the one area where I think we own the sidewalk, you know, as opposed to the city.
All right, Tony, go ahead.
I actually have a two-part question. First part is about, how can I say this? For example, I had a store on 100 State Street, and from the brothers who their grandfather grew up there. One of the advantages of that time, and it was probably before historical preservation got involved in it, is to rent out places. They would basically panel everything and drop the ceilings. So the advantage of that was when we lifted up the ceiling, there was the original tin ceiling in perfect condition underneath. So the advantage of that is it can be restored, going to what you were saying about being able to put things back the way they were. That's changing, and that's what's scary. So now that's being sold to someone who's basically gutting the place. And how can we stop that? I mean, everybody who knows about that place is cringing every time we walk past it because we know what was there. Is there any way to control that sort of thing? And the second part of the question is, how is this going to go in the future? I came from New York and Brooklyn, where they all got torn apart from all the old-timers that grew up there and got bought up by everybody building high skyscrapers on one section lots. And I'm starting to see that happening now here. I'm seeing more places being up for sale, they're getting gutted, and there doesn't seem to be an understanding of the history. I'm afraid, I'm seeing signs this is going the same way. how can you keep that from happening in the future?
Inside and outside, that's
Yeah.
yours, Andy.
Well, I have some thoughts.
Go ahead.
Okay. I don't know, and to be honest, that is precisely the things that keep me up at night as well. And I will just interject gently that when my husband and I moved to Rhode Island, we lived in Newport for a year. That's where I was working, and honestly couldn't leave Newport fast enough. Moved to Bristol the following year and felt this great sigh of relief. So nothing strikes terror in my heart than when I am sitting in the HDC meeting and someone says, "Oh, I just moved up here from Newport," because I think, oh dear, right? So my response to this is to just hammer people with education and make it as freely available as possible. I don't know if any of you know this, but the Historical Society, we send out a welcome package to everybody who moves into the district. If you buy a house in Bristol, you get a letter from my organization that says, "Welcome to Bristol. We're here if you need us. These are our services." We include a membership that actually it's an old membership application, and this is kind of funny because it has let's just say it's not the same membership rate. So I know when somebody signs up as a member through that. I'm just using off my old, membership envelopes, but I know when somebody signs up because they're not signing up at the usual rate, and I always honor it. And that letter is written deliberately and intentionally. Number one, I wanted to set the tone for what you're moving into. I don't know what the real estate agents have told you, and that's another conversation that we could have. But I know it seems to often come as a surprise that they're in a historic district or they're in a historic community. So that letter is intended to remind them that when you signed your paperwork, amid all that huge stack of documents that you signed, was acknowledgement that you're in the historic district. And so just to remind you, that probably went by pretty quick with all the other things that you're signing. But here you are, setting the tone. You live in Bristol. We are a historic community. We take that seriously. The second subtext is, I want to help you. I want to help you do the right thing by your building. Please come to our Historical Society. And this is why I deliberately don't sit on the district, on the committee, the Historic District Commission, is so that I can provide, so that I can advocate, so that I can provide information. And the last piece is a little bit of a subtextual warning. I'm watching you, right? You're going to see me at the Historic District Commission meeting. And I'm either going to support you or I'm not going to support you. And so it's threefold thing. We work very hard at, this is what the the Bristol Historical and Preservation Society's Pozzi Center is intended to do, to educate about historic preservation, what our best practices. So a lot of times we get somebody at the Historic District Commission. I think I was about to fall off my chair when I was looking at, a 2-inch raise of a roof on a building. But you know what? That owner came around in a big way. She came around, she's going to take one of the most historic houses in Bristol that she had just recently purchased, and literally lop the roof off and raise it 2 feet, elevate it 2 feet, so she could get a pool table up on the 3rd floor, right? And I worked really hard with her. There was a lot of outreach. Here is the contact information for a whole bunch of historic preservation contractors. Please call them. They're waiting for you. I've already told them you're coming, right? Here is the phone number for a man who lives in the house that is the mate to yours. It's exactly like your house. Please meet with him. He's ready and waiting for your call. I do a lot of that. The only way that I see to combat this is through education, through outreach, through knowledge, and through making them a part of the community. So one of the other things that I do, I want people to fall in love with their houses. So sometimes when they come in, I go quickly, we have files, I got to find a fun fact. I want you to love something about your house, which it makes you disinclined to make changes to it. But I lose a lot of the time, right? I'm going to lose I lost 8 Constitution. I'm going to lose. So it happens.
So the answer is, on the face of it, we're not going to be restricting the inside of houses. That would just never pass.
Yeah.
So, but to your point, you hit a home run. It's education. So the thing is that if you can serve the Kool-Aid, and you can convince people of the importance of the outside skin of the house to the fabric of Bristol, then they therefore would maybe naturally start to think about, well, the inside is special too. So you have to begin that process by educating them on the outside that you sort of have control over. I mean, I hear so many people say, well, being upset and not understanding the positives of living in a historic district commission. I mean, when you're in a historic district commission, it's like district. It's like you own a blue chip property. Like somebody buys a house in another neighborhood, somebody can do anything they want beside you, and you have no control. They could build a modern house, they can rip down the house, they can not take care of their land, it could be a blight. They can do anything they want. When you're in the Historic District Commission, you know that there's a governing set of rules that are protecting your investment. And think about that. I mean, most people, when they buy a house, they're thinking about it as their nest egg. That's eventually they're going to retire and they're going to sell that house. So when you sell that house 30 or 40 years ago from now, you want it to be worth as much as possible. Well, the way you improve the chances that it is you get within a community where they restrict what can happen and you can't do bad things. And so I think that people have to look at that, and I think a lot of people do. But look at the positives of being in a sort of more controlled environment so that your resale stays high.
I want to speak to the idea we got to get some carrots. The town now, if you live in your house, will give you a tax break. There's no reason the ordinance couldn't give a bigger tax rate for those who are living in a house that's under historic control. It becomes an incentive. They give that to owner-occupied, and one of our big fears and problems here is being bought up by outsiders as good investments, and they rent them out. They don't get the tax break. Owner-occupied do. There's a way we can increase that for those living in the historic district. And, I'm kind of retired, so I haven't kept up as much as possible, but there are historic districts that towns that give a tax incentive for people to put some controls on the interior of their house. They get an extra benefit. They used to be able to give money. There's no money to be given now, but there's ways in which you can encourage and enhance the integrity of a building by having some carrots for people. And I think that, what the town needs now is a new study commission that goes into some of these things that are being done nationwide and see what we could do here. But there are things that can be done. Traditionally we've been, oh shit, they can do what they want on the inside. Well, a lot of people are saying no.
Can I just make a point about that? I'm actually doing a 3D model of Bristol, of all of the houses from the late 1800s. And in that process, I realized how much store activity was around Wood Street, around the whole area there. When I look at those buildings and researching them, basically they're being used for storage right now. So when you look in the window, there's a bunch of junk in these places. Now I'm realizing there may be maybe it's older people that live there, and maybe they don't want to rent out the storefront to do anything with. Is there some way that maybe you could provide tax relief if they wanted to fix that up to be rentable, to be used? There's so much space around Bristol that's just not being used. But keep it so it has the historical value of it. And that would help Bristolians. But I'm gathering if someone has the space, they've got to bring it compliant with so many things, and it's got to be restored. But if there was some incentive to be able to get credit for that, to be able to open it up, to rent out, to actually have stuff going on here. Does that make sense?
Can I tell you who I don't have any tolerance for? I don't have any tolerance for people that come in and buy and then rent as a business. So they come to, well, I need to make more money. And the second is I don't have tolerance for people that bought something and they know it's in a district and now they're crying to you because of the restrictions. And I don't have any tolerance. Like, you'd made the decision, I'm not looking at you. This person made the decision to live in the district, and then go cry to somebody else. Because all the people in the district are protecting what's in the district, and you can't just come in and change the rules and complain about them.
Yeah.
So, I will just say two things about or three things about the storefront analogy. I mean, part of it's an economic thing. There just doesn't seem to be an economic demand for people to have retail or offices off on these side streets. The little corner grocery stores can't compete with, they couldn't compete with the supermarkets 50 years ago, and they can't compete with them now either. So I don't know, that's always going to be a problem. As far as the other two elements of it, though, there is, I mean, part of it are building code requirements that require separation, fire separation between commercial and living space, but there is in Rhode Island the rehab code, which does make it a little bit easier for people who are rehabbing historic structures with those mixed uses in it. And the other thing is, there are communities in Rhode Island that I don't know of anybody that provides a flat-out tax break just because you're living in a historic district. But there are communities that provide, if you have your historic rehabilitation work done to the Secretary of the Interior standards, and it has to be inspected and certified, then you can get basically a tax credit on your property taxes after you've done it for up to a certain number for the money that you spent in fixing up and restoring a historic house. And that's something that could be done here in Bristol, but it's always, it's a balancing act. If that's done, then someone else is going to pay more taxes if that is done. But it's a possibility, and it's a bit more targeted than it would be just giving everybody who lives in the historic district a credit.
And the last thing, I'm sorry to take up time, but the questions that I have, not so much on the historical, but for example, the guy who had the shoe store on Wood Street, talking to him, someone bought the building, his rent was just put up $1,000. What can we do about that? I mean, that's an old-timer that has been there for so many years and overnight can be put out for a ridiculous rent rate.
I would say nothing, but
Not this board, or not this panel.
I mean, Tony, I don't think that you're wrong to point out all of these issues, and I think that some of them need to go before the town council. The challenge to Bristol is that we do not have, that we have the size population that we have, and if anything, it's sort of shrinking, and that size population will only serve a certain number of businesses and restaurants, and this is where I think we get into a very different trap. And I don't think Bristol has really had any conversation about it, about all the tourism. The tourism is, right now, okay, so let's just take, for example, something like Leo's, right? Where we don't have enough population in Bristol eating at Leo's enough to support Leo's. Rents have gone up, cost of food has gone up, et cetera, right? Let's just take that as a given. Okay, so then we invite tourists in because tourists, as the dollars say, spend, what is it, $2 in the community for every, I don't know, whatever it is. Like, they spend a lot of money in our communities. So we invite the tourists in. Okay, well, Bristol does not have a huge number of hotels. So now it becomes economic to do Airbnb of your house. Okay, but Airbnb chips away at the size of the community because now, and you'd be appalled, right? Somebody sent me the receipts for January, right? Not like July, but January, and some 1,900 beds were filled in January. Okay, 500 of that is the Bristol Harbor Inn, but the rest of that is Airbnb. So, we're losing that as well, right? And so now when suddenly it becomes profitable to, you make, $600 in a weekend for Airbnb, now it's better to rent Airbnb instead of long-term rentals, which continues to chip away at, right? You sort of see the economics of it, right? So things for Bristol to talk about. We're not talking about them. This is not the purview of this panel, but we're not talking about, why don't we have an ordinance? Why aren't we taking taxes from Airbnb more than we are? We're not talking about the community costs of the tourism that we are inviting into our community, and I am as bad as everybody else because I just ran this big weekend, but we have these festivals every single weekend in the summertime that we invite people in that change the economic formulas of our town. Those cut in lots of different ways, and I don't think we're having enough conversation about it. I'm not at all suggesting one way or another, although I have my feelings about Airbnb. But I think we're not, the broader point I would want to make is we're not talking about it as a community, and we should be.
Right.
But I do want to leave time for some other questions over here.
So this actually is adjacent to, Catherine, what you were just talking about. So first, a disclaimer, I am a realtor. And by the way, if somebody is buying a house in the historic district, the seller's disclosure should state that the house is in the historic district. And I know certainly for me, that would be something I'd be promoting as a plus. So side note. The question is about accessory dwelling units. Which there have been some changes in the rules in Rhode Island. And I'm curious if there's any discussions in the Historic District Commission about how those are regulated, since sometimes it's an internal part of the house for people who aren't familiar with the new rules, but a lot of times by right you can do an additional building depending on the size of the lot and how much of the lot your house takes up. So curious about what rules or what discussions are happening in terms of making sure that ADUs fit in with the Historic District rules.
Well, the changes to the state law on ADUs do not exempt them at all from historic district zoning. So, first of all, to be as of right, fully as of right, you have to have a lot of 20,000 square feet or more. There aren't a lot of lots that big in the historic district. But to the extent that people do come in with ADUs, they're basically going to be looked at with the same review as we get people who come in with garages all the time. Garages with second stories, carriage houses, things like that. We're already getting that. And so they would continue to be looked at from the historic aspect as well. Are they compatible? Are they appropriate for the lot and the district where they are?
It's already come up.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, it came up. I'm one of those dreaded people who moved here from Newport.
Yeah, but Ken, so far you're okay.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. I'm doing my best. And I would add to the fact of the infrastructure and the zoning plan of Bristol having the wide sidewalks is a godsend because I lived on the Point, which is a beautiful neighborhood, but the trees in the width of the sidewalk was becoming a huge issue for ADA compliance, and there've been all sorts of battles. So I'm glad we're not having those here. But it was the same thing in Newport, was whether if someone wanted to do an ADU, whether it would fit in the historic rules. So I'm glad to hear that's working here too.
And we haven't even touched on, and we're not going to at this hour, sea level rise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, 1 second.
Yeah, maybe see if we have any other questions maybe from other people before we...
Yes. I just want to thank you guys, actually all the humans that are here, because part of it is that, the takeaways I'm getting are incredible. Thank you for your service, honestly. We aren't talking enough, but we are talking, and today's part of that, and I'm grateful for that. Eric, you made an observation that this, a takeaway for me was, of all the places you've been, you think that Bristol's doing pretty good, and that makes me very happy. And Andrew, I love it when you said, yeah, I'm going by the school, and I'm really glad that it's there, but it's kind of annoying because I want to get where I'm going. But I think we've got a little bit of a patience muscle in Bristol because of the conversations that we do have, which aren't enough, and we can do more, but it's pretty cool. Kevin he'll come back and I'll give him praise person to person about wishing when newcomers arrive, take a minute, take a year, before you get all excited about making a change that brings some of what you brought from the other place here. And that's a great wisdom that I appreciate. And, you know, David, I'm going to end with something. And I'm making a statement as opposed to asking a question, but you guys will respond. Your statement about delight and the feeling that comes from things is part of the vibe. So I just report as a newcomer that the feeling of Bristol is accumulating for me. You know, you have your first feeling when you come, and it's like, hey, yeah, let's live here. This would be cool. And then you find out why as time goes by. And I have grandchildren. They refer to me as Papa. And we're walking down the street past a certain structure that you've all referred to, the Vulture House, and they would grab my hand. Oh, Papa, that's a haunted house. And that's the way it was for the longest time. And then it no longer was a haunted house because something was going on there. And the kids would walk by and they'd refer to it as the haunted house. And not last week, probably last month, daughter stops and says, wow, look at that. The haunted house is getting real pretty, Papa. And you made reference to the person that did that, and that's part of our community. And she's right here right now, Peggy. No, I mean, and that's one of us deciding to do something in our town in a way that we kind of say, yeah, let's keep it a certain way and have that feeling. And so I want you to know that the granddaughter has that feeling, and everybody to know that it's a long fight, it's a long slog, and we might not win the battle here and there, and someone may leave a building, and we may not have, you know, the right kind of rent or the right kind of stuff, but victory is happening, and you guys have contributed to that through the years. And
So, I will say that one of the points, first of all you have to do is look at the history of Benefit Street or downtown Newport or downtown Bristol 50 years ago to realize the change that has occurred through historic preservation. It would blow your mind. I mean, go take pictures and learn about what Benefit Street looked like in the 1940s and 1950s. You would be shocked. And so, I think it's important to bring up the point that this was started in 87. I was there in 96 or so, mid-90s. I was only 10 years old. And we had made so few decisions. And so you could see change, but you really couldn't see change. But looking back decades now, you can see change. You can imagine how many bad decisions could have been made over 40 years that could have a significant. Your point. It's time. It's patience.
I would just tell you, come up with 1959, a proposal for downtown Bristol. I found this copy in a planning office in Bristol. I can't find the original anymore. But 1959, if you want to see what Bristol might have looked like.
Yes, we missed our opportunity to be Garden City.
If you need to know, it takes out everything on Hope Street from the library down to State Street, everything on State Street down to Thames Street, and creates a big shopping mall.
Dated shopping mall.
Yeah. I would mention one thing we didn't mention for parking is, I call it the choke and smoke down there. What's it called?
Pick and pay.
Pick and pay. Well, that's the last and only building that'll have parking in the front. That was with GAR Hall, used to be there, but that got the ordinance changed so that you can't have that recess. Again, that was the image of what you do to solve the parking problem. Stick it back on the lot, put parking in front. So that's the only one we'll have for that.
Choke and smoke. I
Smoke and choke.
learned something today. I'm going to give you a hug.
It's a smoke shop, they call it. Yeah.
Yeah, but
I've always called it.
Yeah. But the chips are cheap. One last question. Hold on.
How would we score ourselves, both commission and community at large, for integrating Roger Williams students who are inclined towards these kinds of concerns, architecture in general? How well are we scoring bringing that generation into the passion and concerns this group reflects today?
So to clarify, you want to know how well we're integrating in with the young people at Roger Williams?
how well would we score ourselves in collaborating and encouraging students who are inclined in these disciplines that are represented by the panelists to come along and make that their life vocation?
Well, I can speak. Never well enough. But for years they have been. You're sitting in a room that was first restored by students of Roger Williams right after we took over Linden Place, just to try and generate some income, so this was first restored for it. The Habs drawings have done surveys of the buildings, have done research on buildings downtown. They've proposed projects. There have been lots of other projects done on historic buildings in the Historic Society, the State House, Cogswell Farm. Is there more should be done? There's always more that should be done. We have had traditionally an internship program where students have interned with different, both private firms and museums downtown. So there's a lot you can do, but then the focus of the university is thinking international now, and they want to get a big splash in the paper somewhere for doing something bigger than the little projects that we were known for. But they're still doing some, but I don't want to be critical, so not as much as we want to.
And I would add, that's an excellent question, and not only the students who might become architects or whatever, but the other thing I worry about is the preservation of traditional skilled crafts, because the only way to preserve the detail of the historic district is to have people who know who aren't afraid to take on the job of recreating the moldings or fixing things and you know, all the decorative detail on our houses. And you know, I'm encouraged from time to time watching this old house that there are trade schools, you know, coming into being that focus on that, and that's going to be a key part of whether we're able to make recommendations and have them followed in the future.
So I'll say two things. I'm a pretty traditional architect, and I'm lucky enough to have my entire staff of 3 people of Roger Williams graduates. So and one of them has been with me for 28 years. So it's an incredible strength. On the other hand, there's a huge pedagogy issue with architectural programs throughout the country, with the exception of 2 or 3 universities. They're really not teaching a respect of traditional architecture correctly.
Yeah, I was going to add to that to say that I'm willing to cut Roger Williams a lot of slack as far as there's a lot of challenges to working in a university right now. Building trades internships are just not supported by the way a university is structured. There are very real concerns about what happens when a student gets injured on a work site. Again, these are, I don't mean to diminish these. I've taught at Salve Regina for 9 years, and I watched those things go up in smoke. Once the liability insurance became too much, you couldn't take a kid to a work site. And then there are other challenges that are pursuant to equity and accessibility that take time away from class time in order to do these things. So you can't count, you have to, for example, transportation to a work site falls within your 50-minute class period, right? So, and then it's very difficult if you want a 3-hour class period, which is about the most you can get. It's just really difficult to even get those into the curriculum. I thought Arnold Robinson's efforts and solution to that was quite impressive. He had a class that met from 9 to 12, then there was a break, and it met again from 5 to 8, same day. And I thought it was a pretty creative workaround to some of the real challenges. That said, let's just say I'm not a fan of where Roger Williams is as far as their preservation program right now, and leave it at that. All right. Oh, one more.
I hope you don't mind. I'm speaking as an outsider. I've been on the Historic District Commission in Mystic, Connecticut, and I just came here for some perspective. Real quick, Kevin, I appreciate what you said about living for a year, but at least where I'm from, the only houses you can afford, if you wait for a year, you've got rain coming down on you and squirrels living in the walls, because the only houses that are affordable are the ones that you have to keep from falling down. But my main question is, and what we've struggled with down in Mystic is, for lack of a better word, compared to when a lot of these buildings were built, our relationship with our climate has changed. One thing that we struggled with a lot are people want to put in split unit air conditioners with all the external conduit and the external air handlers. And, you know, where do we allow those? What should we say people can't cool their house? The other thing with respect to technology is, as weather is pretty bad on the Connecticut coast, I'm sure it's bad here, people say, gee, rather than having to replace my siding on the weather side or my front porch deck every 10 to 20 years, can I use some of the newer composites? And we've become fairly liberal about that because they do, it's not like, we come a long way since aluminum siding. And there are newer materials that last a lot better and will keep the house looking good for those people 50 years from now. And I just wondered if you have had similar experience here.
Yeah.
Well, I think to take your first thing about the splits and whatnot, you know, again, I think it's kind of a reversible thing. Is it necessarily pretty, aesthetic? No, but as long as you minimize it, you know, try to keep them off the front of the house with the runs. And we have a lot of requests for air conditioner compressors and whatnot. And we try to say, you know, as long as you're not putting it in the front, try to put it in the side, screen it with a little enclosure, landscaping, try to do that. Yeah, be liberal on allowing that sort of thing so that people can live there. Again, it also helps with windows. If you get the air conditioning, then they're not complaining that they can't open the windows. Then they can paint them shut if they want. The second part about the materials, I think I'll just speak from our experience here in Bristol is I think we've become a lot more liberal, particularly where not visible. So if you've got a deck in back or a porch that's up high, even in front, the decking of it, we're pretty much okay with Trex and similar materials, because it really is just a pain to have to paint your deck every single year. Or you should do it, it looks terrible, and we don't even live that close to the water, and our deck looks terrible, and you know, so it's got to be done. So that's something, and then the railings and stuff that are visible, again, if it's not visible, it's in back, that's different, and not just the shiny vinyl, something that's paintable so it can blend in. I think we're getting more liberal. I think we're still on the cusp of siding the house with it, because even the best of the artificial ones don't seem to still give you the profile on the shingles or clapboard that you would get with a real wood, natural wood structure. So that's kind of in progress. And then the final thing that I was going to say, and I've lost my train of thought on that, so I'll hand it over to David.
So we could literally have a 1 week workshop on what is green, what is real green, what's being sold to you as green. I mean, where does fiberglass come from? I'm not even saying that it's bad or good, like, well then, so there's just so many levels deep. But I mean, one level, it goes back to that mutton bar. That if you're trying to save the mutton bar, you're trying to save the soul of the piece of wood. You're trying to save the piece of wood. Once you're made the jump and saying, I need to replace a column, and you can replace, first of all, old growth wood doesn't exist anymore. So you can't, putting a wood column in, they were rotting out in the base even in the old days. But so the wood column, to redo them in wood doesn't make sense. On the other hand, the details, the sharp details that existed on a lathe do not exist in a mold, with rare exceptions. I mean, I actually, in many cases, will actually build handmade fiberglass columns from a mold. So we make one mold, and then they make fiberglass columns with the tight edges, but it's done by hand by shipbuilders here locally. So half of that's good, and half of it's still fiberglass, and it's really bad. But the one thing that makes me feel good is that column is probably going to last forever, and it's beautiful. So that's a really, really complex question.
Very close to where we are. with that. And you've got to trade off what's going to last and actually look better 50 years from now, especially if you're dealing with a porch that's so rotted, you're not going to save that wood, and you can't find the old growth of wood.
The other thing I would just say is, I think it's important for all of us to keep abreast of what's going on and the changes, because that's where things are changing technologically. Gutters was the third point I was going to make out. People want to replace their wood gutters, and we were routinely saying no, because the only alternative was the K-shaped aluminum gutter that bore no resemblance to what was there. Now, fiberglass gutters are pretty much financially competitive, and they can be pretty good at duplicating. Usually the gutters don't have all those specific details that the columns do that you need, and they can replicate it. So fiberglass gutters are one of those examples of things that didn't really exist widely 5 years ago, and now are a very good solution for people.
So that's
I
really...
wanted to say that word for word someone can say when they come in with an old house that they want it to be maintenance-free. As soon as you say that, you say move. A house is not designed to be maintenance-free. The more shortcuts you take to make it maintenance-free, the more you're endangering the integrity of the building, the aesthetic integrity of the building, and everyone else around who sees you do these shortcuts. So I'm always have been for honesty of materials. If you're going to be a wood gutter, you do a wood gutter. If it's not a wood gutter, put something else up and accept it. Don't phony it up. I'm sitting here now and I get upset with people here. If you look up the top of the balustrade of Linden Place, one of the most historic houses here is not made of wood. It's a composite. It'll last forever. They won't have to go up and paint it. That's not how this building was built. That's not the honesty that this building should have. I opposed it back then. I never liked it, and I'll point it out right now. That to me is someone's looking for the shortcuts, the maintenance-free. So you are making a commitment when you're in an older building. You are making a commitment to try and be honest with it. And so I know there are new materials, but fortunately they change very quickly. We start making these exceptions because something's new. I can think of the friend who had his whole house rewired because he was going to hook everything up so he can control it by his phone. And within 2 years later, it's all wireless. He did all this work. And I get the same thing with some of this technology. It looks great now, but, and I'll use my last example, Kenwood, which is a Robert Adams building in London, and they had beautiful medallions up there, and they replaced them, 3 of them with fiberglass because I couldn't remake them. They looked brilliant. 3 years later, they still look brilliant. 5 years later, they still look brilliant. 15 years later, they still look brilliant, but all the rest had matured, had taken on a patina, and now you had these headlights standing at you, these brilliant creations. And that to me is a lesson. I know there's going to be exceptions, but I really say when you hear maintenance-free, you hear someone who's going to probably make some serious mistakes unless you check it. And I'll end with that.
So that's interesting because there's definitely this balance between reproducing Notre Dame by hand as they did, and this being, your example here being closer to that, where this deserves a certain different level of respect, and then the masses, the average masses. And I'd like to think that my goal has always been to educate people in the masses to care about good design and get good design to the masses. I mean, consider that Sears and Roebuck Company 120 years ago was selling kits of really, really good quality design, and they would basically, you'd go there, you'd pick it up, and they'd send your stuff in shipments. And so it would be a dream of mine, and it had good design. That's the key, have people care about design. So how do you find I guess there are different levels, and infilling that middle to lower level is as important, because I guess there's an equal amount of bad trad on the top as there is in the bottom, but there's more bad trad from the middle to the bottom that we could improve.
Yeah. I was just going to poke at David to say, you know, Frank Lloyd Wright cared very deeply about design for the masses and felt that everything should be beautiful. See, you know, you have much in common. I know we have a few more questions, but I think we probably are coming up on 2 hours, and I think we definitely need a break between now and the walking tour. I know the panelists will probably hang around for a few minutes for any last questions. Those of you who have signed up for the walking tour, we're going to meet out at the gate there at 1 o'clock, so you have time to grab a sandwich or something. We're happy to provide direction for where to get a sandwich if you would like. My thanks go to this panel, this extraordinary panel. Thank you so much for your expertise. And thank you for coming today. All right.
And then I would also mention, just if you're leaving, the importance of being part of the associations and membership, because you rely on it.
Yes. Join the HBS. We take donations. Thank you. Yes.